Commander Michael Rain stood at the observation deck of Arouse Prime, watching the stars outside the viewport. The space station hung in the void like a gleaming metal spider, its massive arms extending from a central hub where the great conclave was taking place. 20 years of war between humanity and the blue-skinned Xen-Owens had led to this moment, a fragile ceasefire that could either bloom into peace or collapse into renewed bloodshed. Michael adjusted his formal diplomatic uniform, the medals from his combat days heavy against his chest. His reflection revealed a man approaching 40 with deep lines around his eyes and streaks of gray at his temples. The scars on his face and prosthetic left hand were permanent reminders of what this conflict had cost him. Commander Rain, a junior diplomat, approached. The preliminary meeting begins in 30 minutes. Ambassador Ellis requests your presence. Michael nodded. I'll be there momentarily. When the aide left, Michael returned his gaze to the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, and somewhere else was Xenos Prime, the home world of their adversaries. Two civilizations locked in conflict since first contact, when a misinterpreted signal led to the destruction of humanity's first colony ship. Just don't let them see your hate, he whispered to himself, an old mantra from his diplomatic training. With a deep breath, he turned away from the stars and headed toward the briefing room. The great chamber of Astralis Prime was a marvel of neutral architecture, a perfect circle with equal spaces for both delegations. The ceiling was a transparent dome revealing the stars above. The room hummed with tense conversation as diplomats circulated. During the pre-negotiation reception, Michael stood with a glass of untouched water, observing the Xeno and delegation. Their blue skin ranged from pale aquamarine to deep cobalt, their bodies taller and more slender than humans. The most striking difference was their eyes, large with vertical pupils that expanded and contracted like a cat's. They're more frightened than they let on, Ambassador Owen Ellis murmured, appearing at Michael's side. Their resources are as depleted as ours. This peace isn't a choice. It's a necessity for both our species. A commotion rippled through the Xeno and delegation. The chamber's main door slid open, and a procession of royal guards entered, tall warriors with ceremonial spears and shields bearing the imperial crest. Behind them walked Empress Sailor, ruler of the Xenon Empire. The room fell silent, even by Xenon standards. She was tall, her skin a rich sapphire blue. She wore a simple but elegant robe of silver material, and a thin circlet of polished black stone rested on her head. Her presence commanded attention without demanding it. Following a few steps, behind her was a small figure, a child. The young Xenon boy couldn't have been more than the equivalent of 8 or 9 human years. This must be Prince Iris, the Empress's only child and heir to the Xenon throne. The human delegation bowed respectfully as protocol demanded. As the formal greetings began, Michael noticed the young prince looking around the chamber with open curiosity, a stark contrast to the measured expressions of the adult Xen-Owens. During a momentary lull in conversation, Michael noticed Prince Iris was no longer at his mother's side. Canning the room, he spotted the young Xenon slipping between groups of adults, apparently exploring on his own, while his royal guards were distracted. On instinct, Michael began moving through the crowd, keeping track of the child. The boy was heading toward a less populated area of the chamber. Years of military training had taught Michael to recognize potential security risks, and an unsupervised royal heir definitely qualified. As he approached, Michael saw the prince were reached the observation window. The child pressed his blue hands against the transparent material, staring out at the stars with undisguised wonder. Impressive view, isn't it? He said in carefully practiced Zenuan, his artificial hand automatically adjusting to form the subtle gestures that accompanied their language. The prince turned quickly, startled by Michael's voice. Up close, the boy's features were softer than adult Zenon's, his skin a lighter shade of blue that would darken with age. His eyes held the same penetrating quality as his mother's. You speak our language, the prince observed, his voice carrying the musical quality characteristic of Zeno speech. Michael nodded. I do, though not as well as I would like. Better than most humans, the boy replied, studying Michael with open curiosity. His gaze lingered on Michael's artificial hand. You were a warrior. I was. Did you fight against my people? The directness of the question caught Michael off guard. Diplomatic training urged caution, but something in the child's earnest expression pushed him toward honesty. Yes, he answered simply. I did. The prince nodded solemnly. My father was a warrior too. He died in the Battle of Proxima Century. Michael felt a cold sensation in his stomach. He had been there commanding a destroyer during that brutal engagement. Thousands had died on both sides, including many of his own crew. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. The prince turned back to the stars. I don't remember him. I was too young when he left. They say the stars look different from Earth. Is that true? They do, Michael replied. The constellations are entirely different. We have stories for our star patterns just as your people do. Will you tell me one? The prince looked up at him expectantly. Before Michael could answer, a commotion from across the room caught their attention. Several royal guards were moving purposefully through the crowd, clearly searching for the prince. I believe your security detail has noticed your absence, Michael observed. The prince's face fell. They never let me explore. Everything is always too dangerous or not appropriate for your station, Your Highness. Michael smiled. Despite himself, they're responsible for your safety. That's an important duty, but how will I learn about humans if I can't talk to any? The prince challenged. Fair point, Michael conceded, though perhaps starting with someone less controversial than a former enemy combatant might be wiser. The prince studied him for a moment. You were different from what I expected. Oh, and what did you expect? The tutor said. Humans are aggressive and unpredictable. That you hide your true intentions behind false expressions. The prince's head tilted slightly. But you don't hide. I can see your sadness. Michael felt unexpectedly exposed under the child's perceptive gaze. Before he could respond, one of the royal guards spotted them and quickly approached, beer held formally but with unmistakable tension. Your Highness, the guard said sharply, in the Zenoan language, positioning himself between the prince and Michael. You must return to the Empress immediately. We were just talking about stars, the prince protested. Guard's vertical pupils narrowed as he assessed Michael. This human is Commander Ray, a known warrior, responsible for significant Xeno and casualties. I'm aware of who he is, the prince replied with surprising authority. For one so young, and he was respectful and informative, Michael bowed slightly. To the guard, I apologized for any concern I may have caused. The prince approached the viewing window alone, and I thought it best to ensure his safety. Until his security returned, the guard didn't relax but gave a curt nod. Your Highness, please come with me now. The Empress is waiting. With obvious reluctance, the prince moved away from the window before following the guard. He turned back to Michael. Will you be at tomorrow's formal session, Commander? Rain, I will, Your Highness. The prince nodded, seeming satisfied. Good, I wish to continue our discussion about Earth's stars. As the guard escorted the prince back through the crowd, Michael released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The encounter had been brief, but strangely affecting. There had been no fear in the boy's eyes, no hatred, only curiosity and an openness that adult Xenons rarely displayed toward humans. I see you've met the young Prince, Ambassador Ellis said, appearing at Michael's side. Michael accepted the offered drink. Briefly, he's not what I expected. Children rarely are, Ellis replied, but I'd be careful with that. One, the Xen-Owens are extremely protective of their royal family, especially after the prince's father died at Proxima Centauri. Michael watched as the prince rejoined his mother across the room. The Empress bent slightly to listen to something the boy said, then looked up, her gaze finding Michael with unsettling precision. Her expression remained unreadable, but she inclined her head in what might have been acknowledgement before returning her attention to the Xenon officials around her. The formal negotiations the next day were exactly as grueling as Michael had anticipated. Hours of carefully worded statements, proposed treaty terms, and thinly veiled references to past atrocities committed by both sides. Michael sat to the right of Ambassador Ellis, providing technical expertise when questions about military capabilities and disarmament procedures arose. Across the table, Empress Sailor led the Xenon delegation with a calm authority that commanded respect even from the most hardened human veterans. Prince Aris sat several seats away from his mother, flanked by tutors who occasionally whispered explanations to him. Despite the clear attempts to educate him about diplomatic proceedings, the young prince appeared bored, his attention wandering. Several times Michael caught the boy watching him rather than the ongoing discussions. During a scheduled recess, delegates from both sides separated to confer. Privately, Michael stepped out onto one of the station's enclosed garden terraces, seeking a moment of quiet. The artificial ecosystem was designed to be neutral territory, neither Earth plants nor Xeno and flora, but genetically engineered species that could survive in the station's controlled environment. Commander Rain. Michael turned to find Prince Aris standing just inside the terrace entrance. Two royal guards waited at a distance, watching carefully, but allowing the prince some measure of privacy. Your Highness, Michael replied with a respectful bow. I'm surprised your security permitted you to speak with me again. The prince approached, his movements carrying the natural grace of his species. I told them I commanded it. They must obey, even if they disapprove. A convenient power, Michael observed, unable to keep a slight smile from his face. Sometimes, the prince agreed, though most often I am the one who must obey others. He looked out at the artificial garden. What do you think of the peace discussion so far? The question was surprisingly mature, and Michael considered his response carefully. They're proceeding as expected. Initial positions staked out, boundaries tested. The real negotiations haven't begun yet. Mother says the same. The prince nodded. She says humans begin by asking for more than they want so they can appear generous when they give it up later. Michael raised an eyebrow. Interesting assessment. And what do Xenons do? We state our true requirements from the beginning. The prince said simply, deception is inefficient. Yet your diplomats are as skilled at hiding their thoughts as ours. Michael pointed out gently. The prince considered this. Hiding thoughts is not the same as speaking falsely. One is prudence, the other is dishonor. A meaningful distinction. Michael acknowledged. Your understanding of diplomacy is impressive for one so young. I must learn quickly. One day will lead my people. The prince's voice carried a weight beyond his years. Mother says that may include leading them in dealings with humans for generations to come. A heavy responsibility. Yes, the prince was quiet for a moment, then asked, do you have children, Commander? The question struck like a physical blow, unexpected and painful. Michael turned away, slightly, looking out at the stars beyond the garden's transparent ceiling. I did, he said finally. A daughter. The prince seemed to sense the change. Michael's demeanor. What happened to her? She died early in the war. Michael kept his voice even with practiced control. Our colony on TD was attacked. She was 6 years old. I'm sorry, the prince said quietly, and the simple sincerity in his voice was more affecting than any elaborate condolence. Thank you, Michael replied. They stood in silence for a moment, an unlikely pair united briefly by shared loss. What was her name? The prince asked. Ellie, short for Eleanor. Did you teach her about stars too? Michael nodded, surprised by the memory that surfaced. Yes, we had a small telescope. She loved the stars. In our culture, the prince said thoughtfully, we believe those who have died become part of the cosmic energy that flows between stars. Perhaps she watches you from there. The sentiment was unexpected, and Michael found himself momentarily at a loss for words. Before he could respond, one of the prince's guards approached. Your Highness, the session will resume shortly. The Empress requests your return. The prince nodded reluctantly. I must go, but I would speak with you again, Commander Rain. I would be honored, Your Highness, Michael replied, and was surprised to realize he meant it. That evening, a formal reception was held to mark the conclusion of the first round of talks. Both delegations gathered in the station's grand hall, engaging in the ritual of diplomatic socializing. Musicians played neutral compositions created specifically for the occasion, mathematical harmonies that appealed to both human and Xenon sensibilities despite their different hearing ranges. From across the room, Michael noticed Prince Aris once again slipping away from his attendants. Boy was becoming quite adept at creating diversions that allowed him momentary freedom. This time, however, Michael decided not to intervene. The prince's security would undoubtedly locate him soon enough. To Michael's surprise, the prince made his way directly toward him, navigating through the crowd with determination. Commander Rain, he said formally as he approached, I wish to continue our discussion. Michael bowed slightly. Your Highness, I fear your guards will be searching for you again. I told Them I would be speaking with you, the prince replied. They are watching from a distance. Indeed, Michael could now see several royal guards positioned strategically around the room. Their attention focused on the prince. They seemed to have developed a particular interest in me, Michael observed dryly. They believe you may be a negative influence, the prince said with startling frankness, but I disagree. You answer my questions honestly. Truth can be a dangerous gift, Your Highness, so my tutors constantly remind me. The prince's tone carried a hint of frustration. They tell me about humans in abstract terms, statistics, historical conflicts, cultural differences, but they never speak of individual humans as people. Michael considered this perhaps because it's easier to maintain boundaries that way. Personal connections complicate political necessities. Is that why human children are taught to fear Xenoans? The prince's question was pointed. Some are, Michael acknowledged. Fear is a natural response to the unknown, and to those who have caused harm, as Xenoans fear humans. The prince nodded thoughtfully. Exactly. Fear perpetuates itself unless consciously broken. The prince seemed to consider this carefully. Then personal connections between our species could be valuable for peace, not detrimental. That's an enlightened view, Michael said, genuinely impressed by the young Zenon's reasoning. It seems logical. The prince replied simply, tell me about human families. Are they structured like ours? In our society, children belong primarily to their mothers, the prince explained. Fathers provide genetic material and early protection, but mothers and their chosen advisors handle education and development. My father died performing his protective duty, as is honorable. Michael nodded slowly. Human families are more varied. Traditionally, children are raised by both parents when possible, though single-parent households are common as well. Extended family often plays a role too. Grandparents, aunts, uncles. That seems inefficient, the prince observed. Too many influences could create confusion. Perhaps. Michael smiled slightly, but it also provides children with diverse perspectives and emotional support. Emotional support, the prince repeated, as if testing the concept. My mother says emotions must be controlled for effective leadership. Is that true for humans as well? Control is important, Michael agreed, but complete suppression is unhealthy. Emotions provide insight when properly understood. The prince nodded slowly. My tutors rarely discuss emotions. They focus on facts and protocols. He paused, then added more quietly, sometimes I have questions they won't answer. What kind of questions? About my father, about why we fight humans, about whether I will be a good ruler someday. The prince's vertical pupils dilated slightly. They say such matters will become clear with proper education, but their explanations feel incomplete. Adults often struggle to explain complex truths to children, Michael said gently. Sometimes because they don't know how. Sometimes because they're trying to protect them, and sometimes because they don't know the answers themselves. You don't speak to me that way, the prince observed. You listen to my questions and answer what you can. I try, Michael acknowledged. You listen to me better than my mentors. The prince's voice grew quieter. If you were my father, I would be happy. The statement hung in the air. Between them, innocent clears throat, yet loaded with cultural implications. that Michael only partially understood. Before he could formulate a response, he became aware of several Xeno and diplomats nearby who had fallen silent, their attention fixed on the conversation. One of them, a senior advisor to the Empress, stepped forward. With obvious concern, "Your Highness," he said in the Xenon language, "the Empress requests your presence." The prince straightened, clearly aware that his comment had caused some disturbance. "Of course, please inform Mother. I will join her momentarily." The advisor hesitated, glancing between the prince and Michael with poorly concealed suspicion. "I will escort you personally, Your Highness," he insisted. The prince nodded reluctantly. Before leaving, he turned to Michael. "Thank you for our conversation, Commander Rain. I hope we can speak again tomorrow." "It would be my honor, Your Highness," Michael replied formally, conscious of their audience. As the advisor led the prince away, Michael noticed several human diplomats approaching, including Ambassador Ellis. "What was that about?" Ellis asked quietly. The Xeno and delegation seemed suddenly agitated. Michael shook his head slightly. "I'm not entirely sure. The prince has taken an interest in discussing human customs. Perhaps that's causing concern." "Be careful, Michael," Ellis warned. "The boy is heir to their empire. Any perception of undue influence could be problematic." Later that evening, Michael was approached by an unexpected figure, the Empress's personal attendant, a female Xenon with midnight blue skin. "Commander Rain," she said in formal but fluent English, "Her Imperial Majesty wishes to speak with you privately tomorrow before the negotiations resume." Michael stood outside the Empress's temporary quarters. Precisely at the appointed time, the corridor was lined with royal guards, their ceremonial spears and ornate armor a reminder that despite their primitive appearance, these weapons were wielded by a species whose strength and reflexes exceeded human capabilities. The Empress's attendant appeared at the doorway. "Her Majesty will see you now." The Empress stood by a viewing port mun, looking out at the stars. Without her formal regalia, she appeared less imposing but no less regal. She turned as Michael entered, her vertical pupils contracting slightly in the room's light. "Commander Rain," she said in perfect English, her voice carrying the musical quality characteristic of her species. "Thank you for coming." Michael bowed formally. "Your Imperial Majesty." "It's an honor." She gestured to a seating area. "Please, I understand you have had several conversations with my son," she began without preamble. "Yes, Your Majesty. Prince Aris has approached me with questions about human customs and perspectives. I've tried to answer appropriately while respecting diplomatic boundaries." The Empress studied him for a moment. "My son finds you intriguing. He has spoken of little else these past 2 days. He's an intelligent and perceptive child. His questions show remarkable insight for one so young." "Yes," the Empress agreed. "Aris has always been curious about humans, despite or perhaps because of the conflict between our peoples." She paused. "Are you aware of the significance of his statement to you yesterday about wishing you were his father?" "I gathered it caused some concern among your delegation," Michael replied carefully. "I assume it has cultural implications beyond the literal meaning." The Empress's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Indeed, our society, the role of father is primarily protective during a child's early years. but for royal children. There is another dimension when a royal heir recognizes someone as a parental figure. It carries political weight. Traditionally, it suggests that person has been deemed worthy of trust with the future of our people. Michael felt a chill of understanding. I see that. Explains the reaction. What concerns my advisors, the Empress continued, is that Ares has never expressed such sentiment toward any Zenon, yet he did so with you, a human, and formerly our enemy. After only brief acquaintance, I assure your majesty I did nothing to encourage such a declaration. I'm aware, she said. My son's security detail has monitored your interactions carefully. Your conversations have been appropriate and largely educational. She leaned forward slightly. What interests me is why my son has formed this attachment to you specifically. Michael considered his response carefully. Children often respond to those who treat them with genuine respect. I spoke to the prince honestly, as I would to any intelligent young person. Perhaps that's uncommon in his experience. Because of his royal status, the Empress nodded. Most adults either defer to him excessively or lecture him about his duties. Few speak to him as you have. She studied Michael with those penetrating eyes. He also mentioned that you lost a daughter in the war. The statement caught Michael off guard. Yes, at Tidi, and I lost my consort at Proxima Centauri. The Empress's voice remained even, but Michael sensed the controlled emotion behind it. We have both paid personal prices for this conflict. Commander, today's formal session will include the ceremonial opening statements from both delegations. As is our custom, the royal family will be present for the entire proceedings. She turned to face him. My advisors have suggested I keep Ares away from you. They fear his enthusiasm for your company could be misinterpreted or exploited. Michael nodded. I understand their concerns. I would never wish to complicate the negotiations. And yet, the Empress continued, I find myself disagreeing with their assessment. My son's instincts have rarely led him astray. If he sees something worthy in you, perhaps there is value in that connection. Clear's throat. The Empress entered with Prince Eyes at her side, both dressed in formal royal regalia that gleamed in the chamber's light. They moved to the central platform, the royal family taking their ceremonial positions. As she reached her powerful conclusion about the sacred trust of peace that both species must honor for their children's sake, a commotion at the side of the chamber drew everyone's attention. Prince Aris had returned from a brief absence, but instead of resuming his seat, he was moving purposefully across the open floor directly toward the human delegation. His royal guards, caught off guard by this unexpected movement during such a formal moment, hesitated briefly before starting after him. Michael watched with growing alarm as the prince approached the human section. Protocol dictated strict separation during these ceremonial addresses. The boy's actions were a significant breach that could be interpreted in multiple ways, none of them helpful to the peace process. To Michael's shock, the prince headed straight for him, ignoring the other human delegates. Before anyone could intercept him, Aris reached Michael's position, and in full view of both delegations, the neutral observers and the recording devices capturing the historic moment, embraced him. Father, the young Zenon exclaimed clearly in English, his voice carrying in the Suddenly silent chamber, Michael froze, acutely aware that every eye in the room was fixed on them. The prince's arms were wrapped around him in a gesture that transcended species differences. Child's embrace, spontaneous and genuine, but the word he had spoken carried implications far beyond a simple display of affection. Across the chamber, the empress had stopped mid-sentence, her expression unreadable. To human eyes, the Xenon delegation appeared collectively stunned, while the human diplomats were equally frozen in shock. In the utter silence that followed, Michael could hear his own heartbeat. Protocol, training, and instinct war within him. To reject the child would be a devastating insult that could shatter the fragile progress toward peace. To accept the designation would entangle him in Xeno and royal politics in ways he couldn't predict, and to hesitate too long would appear weak or calculating. In that suspended moment, Michael made the only choice that felt right. He gently returned the embrace, placing one hand, his real one, not the prosthetic, on the prince's shoulder. "Your Highness," he said, quietly but clearly, "you honor me beyond words." The prince looked up at him, those alien eyes somehow conveying very human emotion. "You said truth was important," he said. "This is my truth." A murmur rippled through both delegations. Michael was peripherally aware of Ambassador Ellis's expression of barely controlled panic, of the Xenon guards who had halted their approach, awaiting instruction, of the neutral observers leaning forward in fascination at this unexpected development. But most of all, he was aware of the empress, who had not moved from the podium. All eyes turned to her, waiting for her response to this unprecedented situation. The next word spoken would determine whether this moment became a diplomatic catastrophe or something entirely different. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured and clear, carrying to every corner of the silent chamber. "In our culture," she said, "the word of a child is sacred." They speak with clarity, unclouded by politics or pretense. She paused, her gaze moving deliberately from her son to Michael and back. "If my son recognizes something of value in this human, perhaps we would be wise to consider what he sees that we do not." She stepped away from the podium and approached them, her movement causing another ripple of murmurs through the assembly. Coming to stand before Michael, she regarded him with those penetrating eyes. "Commander Rain," she said formally, "my son has bestowed upon you a designation of great significance in our culture. Do you understand what this means?" Michael met her gaze steadily. "Not entirely, Your Majesty, but I recognize the honor and responsibility it represents." Indeed, something like approval flickered in her expression. "In acknowledging you thus, my son has declared his belief that you would protect and guide him as your own. Clear as throat that you would place his welfare above politics and personal advantage." She tilted her head slightly. "Is he correct in this assessment?" Michael was acutely aware of the diplomatic implications of his answer. Ambassador Ellis was subtly shaking his head in warning. The human delegation appeared collectively horrified at this deviation from carefully planned protocol, but the young prince was looking up at him with absolute trust. And in that moment, Michael could see only his own daughter's face, lost so many years ago. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it, "I cannot claim to fully understand your customs or the political significance of this moment, but I can promise this, I would never betray the trust your son has placed in me. I would protect him as I would my own child, regardless of the differences between our peoples. He paused, then added with simple honesty, I have seen enough of war. If this unexpected connection can somehow serve the cause of peace, then I accept both the honor and the responsibility it entails. The Empress regarded him for a long moment, her expression unreadable to human eyes. Then, in a gesture that caused audible gasps from the Xenoan delegation, she placed her hand atop her son's where it rested on Michael's arm, completing a physical connection between the three of them. Then perhaps, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed chamber, this is how true peace begins, not with treaties and borders, but with trust, freely given and honestly accepted. She turned to face the assembled delegates. The great conclave will continue as planned, but let this moment remind us all that beyond our differences lie possibilities we have not yet imagined. As the Empress and Prince returned to the Xenoan delegation, the chamber erupted in chaos. Ambassador Ellis was instantly at Michael's side, his expression a mixture of disbelief and calculation. What just happened? He hissed under his breath. I'm not entirely sure, Michael admitted, watching as the Empress and Prince Ares returned to the Xenoan delegation. But I think the negotiations just entered uncharted territory. That's the understatement of the century. Ellis shook his head. Half the human delegation thinks you've lost your mind, and the other half, Ellis's expression softened slightly, the other half saw something genuine in that moment, something that might actually lead to peace rather than just another temporary ceasefire. The diplomatic repercussions unfolded rapidly. Both delegations called for emergency consultations, and the formal negotiations were temporarily suspended. Michael found himself sequestered with Ambassador Ellis and the senior human diplomats, explaining and re-explaining every interaction he'd had with the young prince. It's unprecedented, the human diplomatic security chief insisted. A potential security breach of the highest order. The Xenon heir has effectively created a personal bond with a human military officer, or it's an extraordinary opportunity, Ambassador Ellis countered, a genuine connection that could facilitate understanding beyond formal diplomacy. The prince is a child, Michael interjected, an unusually perceptive and intelligent child, but still a child. His actions weren't calculated political strategy. Children can be manipulated, the security chief pointed out, especially royal children raised in a culture that views dynasty as paramount. I don't believe that's what happened here, Michael said firmly. Later that evening, he received an unexpected summons from the Empress. When he arrived at her quarters, he found her alone without the usual attendants or guards. Commander Rain, she greeted him, thank you for coming at such short notice. Of course, Your Majesty. Michael bowed slightly. How may I be of service? The Empress gestured for him to sit, then moved to a viewing port, looking out at the stars. The peace process is faltering, she said, without preamble, not failing but losing the momentum needed to overcome generations of conflict. Ambassador Ellis has expressed similar concerns. Michael acknowledged, of course he has. She turned to face him, because it is obvious to anyone truly committed to peace rather than merely to advantageous Terms, she studied him with those penetrating eyes. My advisors are divided. Some counsel withdrawal from negotiations, arguing that recent events revealed dangerous flaws in the process. And what do you believe, Your Majesty? I believe peace remains essential for both our peoples, she replied simply, but I also recognize the political realities. Without some significant development to reinvigorate the process, the hardliners will gradually regain influence. Michael nodded, understanding all too well. Tomorrow I will announce a formal adoption, the Empress stated, in accordance with ancient Xenon tradition. I will recognize you as co-guardian of Prince Ares with all the ceremonial rights and responsibilities that entails. Michael stared at her in shock. Your Majesty, she held up a hand to stop him. This is not merely a political maneuver, though it will certainly serve diplomatic purposes. It is a recognition of the reality that already exists. My son has chosen you as his father figure. Our traditions allow for such bonds to be formalized when they serve the child's development and the greater good of our people. The political implications would be enormous, Michael said when he found his voice. Both delegations would see it as exactly what it is. The Empress interrupted, a meaningful step toward genuine coexistence between our species. A declaration that we no longer see humanity merely as adversaries, but as potential partners in our shared future. Her expression softened slightly. And as a mother, it is my recognition that my son has found something valuable in your guidance, something I would not deny him. Simply because you were born on a different world. Michael took a moment to absorb the full implications of what she was proposing. It went far beyond his original diplomatic role or even the informal mentorship he had been providing. It represented an unprecedented integration of a human into Xeno and royal structures. Ambassador Ellis would need to be consulted, he said finally, as would Earth Command. This goes well beyond my authority to accept independently. Of course, she nodded. I have already prepared a formal proposal for your delegation's consideration, but I wish to speak with you directly first, as this concerns you most personally. She studied him carefully. Would you be willing to accept such a role, Commander Rain, not merely as a diplomatic function, but as a genuine commitment to my son's development and future? If both delegations approve, he said slowly, I would be honored beyond words to accept such a responsibility, Your Majesty. Something like approval flickered in the Empress's expression. Then we shall proceed. Ambassador Ellis will receive the formal proposal tonight for immediate consideration. The human delegation's reaction to the Empress's proposal was precisely as mixed as Michael had anticipated. Ambassador Ellis called an emergency session of senior staff. It's either diplomatic masterstroke or a catastrophic trap, the security chief declared bluntly. Either way, it's completely outside standard protocols, which makes it potentially valuable. Ellis countered. Breakthroughs rarely come from following established procedures. After hours of debate, the human delegation reached a tentative consensus. They would accept the proposal with certain diplomatic conditions and safeguards to address security concerns. Earth Command would need to be consulted for final approval, but Ellis had sufficient authority to provisionally accept. This will fundamentally change the dynamics of the negotiations, Ellis told Michael. Privately, after the decision was reached, for better or worse, you'll become a symbol of what we're trying to achieve here. Proof that humans and Xenoans can form meaningful bonds. Despite our differences, I understand the responsibility, Michael assured him. That evening, Michael was permitted a brief private meeting with Prince Aris to discuss what would happen. Mother explained the ceremony, the young Zenon said, barely containing his excitement. It will make official what I already knew in my heart. It's a significant step, Michael acknowledged, touched by the prince's enthusiasm, one that carries great responsibility for both of us. I know. Aris nodded solemnly. The advisors explained that too. You will have formal obligations to the empire now, and to me as its heir. His vertical pupils dilated slightly. Are you certain you want this? The direct question, so characteristic of the prince, deserved an equally direct answer. Yes, Michael said simply. I am honored beyond words by your trust, Aris. I will do everything in my power to be worthy of it. The prince smiled, that human expression now natural on his alien features. I told Mother you would say that. She said it confirmed her judgment of your character. The ceremony the next day was conducted with all the formal solemnity of Zenon royal tradition, yet modified to accommodate the unprecedented nature of the occasion. Both delegations gathered in the great chamber, along with neutral observers and official recorders who would document this historic moment. Michael stood before the assembled dignitaries wearing a specially designed formal uniform that incorporated elements of both human and Xeno and ceremonial attire, a physical representation of the bridge being built between their species. The Empress entered with Prince Ares at her side, both dressed in formal royal regalia that gleamed in the chamber's light. They moved to the central platform where Michael waited, the three of them forming a triangle that symbolized the new relationship being established. In the ancient Zenon language, the Empress began the traditional words of adoption, which were then translated for the human delegation. She spoke of sacred trust, of guidance and protection, of wisdom shared across generations. But she also incorporated new elements, references to understanding across differences, to bonds that transcended biological origin, to the courage required to forge new paths. When she finished the formal declaration, she turned to Michael. Commander Michael Rain, do you accept the sacred responsibility of co-guardian to Prince Aris, heir to the Zenon Empire? Do you pledge to guide, protect, and nurture him according to the highest values of both our peoples? Do you commit yourself to serving as a bridge of understanding between our species, beginning with this most personal connection? Michael met her gaze steadily. I do, Your Majesty, with profound gratitude and absolute commitment. She nodded, then turned to her son. Prince Aris, do you confirm your acceptance of Commander Ray as your father guardian with all the trust and obedience such a relationship entails? Do you pledge to learn from his wisdom and honor the bond between you as a symbol of what our peoples might become? I do, Mother, the young prince replied, clearly, his voice carrying throughout the chamber. With all my heart. The Empress turned back to the assembled delegations. Then let it be witnessed by all present that this bond is formally recognized and celebrated by the Zenon Empire. Commander Michael Rain now holds the honored position of father guardian to the imperial heir with all the rights and responsibilities thereof. She reached out, placing one hand on Michael's shoulder and the other on her son's head, a gesture that physically connected the three of them before they watching dignitaries. Let this unprecedented union serve as a symbol of what we seek to create through these negotiations, not merely peace between separate peoples, but genuine understanding that recognizes our shared future among the stars. Yet no sooner had this historic moment been celebrated than a new crisis erupted. Security alarms blared throughout the station, and the diplomatic gathering was thrown into confusion. All delegates to secure positions, the station's AI announced. Security breach detected in diplomatic sector. Royal guards immediately surrounded the Empress and Prince Heiress, while human security personnel moved to protect their delegation. Michael found himself caught between his new ceremonial status, creating momentary confusion about which protection detail should include him. Commander Rain, a Xenon royal guard, called, gesturing for him to join the royal family security contingent. Before Michael could respond, Ambassador Ellis gripped his arm. Stay with our delegation, he ordered. We don't know what's happening. The moment of hesitation was broken by the prince himself, who pushed past his guards and reached for Michael. Father, come with us. The raw fear in the boy's voice made the decision for him. Michael moved swiftly to the royal family's side, his military training automatically assessing threats and escape routes. What's happening? He asked the head of the royal security detail as they began moving the Empress and Prince toward a secure exit. Human extremists, the guard replied tersely. They've breached station security. We believe they're targeting the royal family. Michael felt cold rage building within him. After everything they'd accomplished, after the unprecedented bridge they just built between their species, human terrorists were attempting to destroy it all. As they reached the corridor leading to the royal quarters, an explosion rocked the station. Emergency bulkheads began closing automatically, separating sections to contain potential hall breaches. We're cut off from the secure wing, one of the guards reported. Alternative route required. The Empress remained calm, her hand on her son's shoulder. The diplomatic shuttle bay. She decided, we can secure ourselves aboard the royal vessel until the situation is resolved. They chain direction, moving swiftly through increasingly chaotic corridors. Station personnel and diplomats from minor species were evacuating in all directions, adding to the confusion. As they approached the junction, Michael's combat instincts flared. Wait, he said sharply, extending his arm to halt the royal party. The lead guard looked at him with narrowed pupils, clearly resenting the human's interference. Something's wrong, Michael explained quickly. This route is too exposed. If they've planned this attack carefully. His words were cut short as armed figures appeared at the far end of the corridor, humans in maintenance uniforms carrying improvised weapons. They spotted the royal party. Immediately, there they are, one shouted for Earth and the fallen. The royal guards moved with impressive speed, forming a protective barrier around the Empress and Prince, but they were ceremonial guards, not combat specialists, and they were armed only with their traditional spears and shields. Without hesitation, Michael pushed through them to the front, facing the attackers. Get them to safety, he ordered the guards. I'll hold them. Here, a human cannot be trusted to. One guard began. I just swore an oath to protect the prince. Michael cut him off. Now go. The lead guard hesitated only a moment before nodding. Alternative route. Through maintenance section C move. As the royal party retreated, Michael stood his ground. 5 attackers were advancing, armed with crude but deadly weapons fashioned from station equipment. They slowed when they saw him, a human in a formal uniform that now incorporated Xeno and royal symbols. Out of the way, their leader called. This isn't about you. The blue skins need to pay for what they did to our colonies. I lost my daughter at Tai. Michael replied, his voice hard. I know about loss and revenge, but this isn't justice. It's just more innocent blood. You're a traitor. Another spat, siding with the aliens against your own kind. I'm siding with peace, Michael corrected. Something these negotiations could bring if you don't destroy it all. Now he could see they weren't going to be reasoned with. Their faces showed the blind hatred of those who had reduced an entire species to a dehumanized enemy. The same hatred he had once carried himself before he'd learned to see beyond it. They charged and Michael fell back on years of combat training. His prosthetic left hand, designed for both diplomatic precision and military utility, became a weapon in itself as he deflected the first attacker's crude blade and landed a devastating counter strike. But he was 1 against 5 and without a weapon he could only delay them. A clear's throat. Sharp pain lanced through his side as one of their makeshift knives found its mark. He stumbled but kept fighting, determined to buy enough time for the royal family to escape. A second wound, this time to his leg, brought him to one knee. Attackers closed in, confident now of their victory. The blueskins next one gloated. I don't think so, came a voice from behind them. Human security forces had arrived, led by the diplomatic security chief himself. Stun weapons fired and the extremists collapsed. The security chief approached Michael, who was pressing his hand against the wound in his side, protecting the alien royals. Instead of retreating with our delegation, he observed, helping Michael to his feet. Ambassador Ellis said, you might make that choice. It wasn't a choice, Michael replied through gritted teeth. I gave my word. The security chief nodded, something like reluctant respect in his expression. Me team is on the way. The station is secure now. We caught most of them before they could do real damage. The Empress and Prince safe according to reports. Their shuttle is locked down and protected. Michael nodded, relief washing through him. Despite the pain of his wounds, the extremists, they'll claim we can't be trusted now, that humans will always be a threat. Perhaps the security chief acknowledged, or perhaps your actions today will prove exactly the opposite. He glanced at Michael's bleeding side. Not many humans would take a knife for a Xenon royal. Not many humans have sworn to be a father guardian to one, Michael replied with a weak smile. The aftermath of the attack brought both crisis and opportunity. The extremist plot had been foiled with minimal casualties, but its very existence highlighted the fragility of the peace process. Both delegations withdrew to secure positions while station security conducted a thorough investigation. Michael spent 2 days in the medical bay, his wounds treated by both human and Xeno and physicians, the latter insisting on participating in the care of a recognized royal guardian. despite some human doctors' discomfort with the arrangement. On the third day, as he was preparing to be discharged, he received royal visitors. The Empress entered first, followed by Prince Eyes, both flanked by significantly increased security. The prince broke protocol, immediately rushing to Michael's bedside. "You're injured because of me," he said, distress evident in his voice. "I'm injured because some humans refuse to see a path beyond hatred," Michael corrected gently, "and I'll heal." Quickly, the Empress approached more slowly, studying Michael with those penetrating eyes. "The human security forces report that you faced the attackers alone to allow our escape, that you specifically invoked your oath as Father Guardian when doing so. It seemed relevant at the time," Michael replied with a slight smile. "Indeed." Something like approval flickered in her expression. "Such actions speak louder than ceremonial words, Commander Rain. They prove the sincerity of your commitment." "I meant every word of that oath, Your Majesty. I believe you did." She turned to her son. "Eris insisted on seeing you as soon as you were well enough for visitors. He has been quite concerned." The young prince looked up at Michael, his vertical pupils dilated with emotion. "The guard said you fought very bravely, that you were willing to die to protect us, part of the job," Michael said lightly, trying to ease the child's obvious distress. "No," the prince shook his head firmly. "It was more than duty. The guards would have fought from duty. You fought from something else." The perceptiveness of the observation struck Michael deeply. The prince was right. In that moment of crisis, his actions hadn't been calculated, diplomatic strategy, or even conscious choice. They had been instinct born from a genuine commitment to protect this child who had so unexpectedly entered his life. Before he could respond, Ambassador Ellis arrived, bowing respectfully to the Empress before turning to Michael. "I see you're recovering well," he observed. "Good. Your presence will be needed when negotiations resume tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Michael asked, surprised. "I thought the process would be suspended longer after the attack." "That was the initial plan," Ellis confirmed, "but Her Imperial Majesty has made a compelling case for continuing without delay to demonstrate that extremists cannot derail our progress." He glanced at the Empress with something like respect. "A position our delegation has come to support. The attack has actually strengthened the commitment to peace on both sides," the Empress explained. "Those who witnessed your actions, Commander Ara, a human sworn to protect Xenons and willing to sacrifice himself to do so, have found their perspective changed. My mother has announced that you will join the Xeno and royal delegation when negotiations resume," Prince Aris added, his tone somewhere between proud and possessive. "As my father, guardian, and official cultural liaison." Michael looked to Ellis, who nodded confirmation. "A joint appointment," the ambassador explained. "You'll retain your position with the human delegation while also serving in this new capacity with the Xenoans." Unprecedented, but then so is this entire situation. The symbolism is powerful, the Empress observed. Human who stands with both delegations, embodying the very bridge we are attempting to build between our peoples. As they discussed the arrangements for the Resum negotiations, Michael found himself studying the young prince. Aris was watching the adults with careful attention, clearly absorbing every nuance of this diplomatic discussion. But when he caught Michael's king, the formal mask slipped briefly, revealing the child beneath, a child who had nearly lost his newly recognized father figure to violence and who was still processing that fear. Later, when the Empress was engaged in conversation with Ellis about security protocols, the prince moved closer to Michael's bedside. "I was afraid," he admitted quietly. "When they told us you were fighting the attackers alone, I was afraid too," Michael replied honestly. "Not of the attackers, but of failing to protect you and your mother." The prince considered this. "Is that what fathers feel? Fear of failing to protect?" "That, and so much more," Michael said, pride in watching their children grow, hope for their future, joy in their discoveries. He smiled slightly. "All emotions your tutors probably consider inefficient." The prince's lips curved in response. "Perhaps, but I think I prefer the human approach to fatherhood." "Just one human's approach," Michael corrected. "We're as diverse in our parenting as in everything else." "But you're my father now," Heir said with simple certainty. "The ceremony made it official, and your actions proved it true." The unquestioning acceptance in the young Zen Owen's voice touched Michael deeply. What had begun as a diplomatic anomaly had become something genuine and profound, a connection that transcended species and politics. The next day, when the formal negotiations resumed, Michael took his unprecedented dual position, seated at a point equidistant between the human and Zenon delegations, physically embodying the bridge being built between their peoples. His wounds were still healing, requiring him to use a mobility aid, but that too carried symbolic weight, visible evidence of his willingness to sacrifice for peace. The progress that followed was remarkable, with the extremist attacks serving as a powerful reminder of what was at stake. Both delegations showed new flexibility and commitment. Territorial disputes that had seemed intractable were resolved through creative compromises. Military de-escalation protocols that had been contentious were agreed upon with surprising speed, and throughout, Michael served as both technical advisor and cultural interpreter, helping each side understand the unspoken assumptions and values underlying the other's positions. His unique connection to Prince, who continued to attend the sessions as part of his education, provided a constant reminder of the personal dimension of what they were building, not just an abstract peace between species, but a future where children like Eris might grow up without the shadow of war. 3 weeks after the adoption ceremony, as the final treaty terms were being prepared for formal ratification, Michael found himself alone with the Empress in a quiet moment between sessions. "When you first allowed your son to call me father, did you anticipate where it would lead?" he asked, curious about the strategic depth of her thinking. The Empress considered the question thoughtfully. "I anticipated possibilities," she acknowledged, "but not certainties. The connection between you and Aris has proven more significant than even I expected. It's changed me," Michael admitted, "in ways I never anticipated when I accepted this diplomatic assignment, as it has changed my son," she replied, "and through him, perhaps our entire people." She studied Michael with those penetrating eyes. "When he first declared you father before the assembly, he created a moment of potential crisis. Your response transformed it into an opportunity. That pattern has repeated itself throughout these negotiations." Michael nodded slowly, crisis into opportunity. Perhaps that's the essence of true diplomacy and of parenthood as well. Indeed, something like warmth showed in the Empress's expression. You have fulfilled your oath as father, guardian with honor, commander reign. What happens next will determine whether our peoples can do the same with the promises we are making to each other. Through this treaty, the formal signing ceremony took place the following day. The great chamber was filled beyond capacity with representatives from neutral species present to witness this historic moment. And GT snorts. And GT, the treaty itself, formerly titled the Astralis Accord, represented far more than territorial agreements and disarmament protocols. It established frameworks for cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and ongoing diplomatic engagement that would build upon the foundation laid during these momentous weeks. As Michael stood with both delegations for the official recording of the event, Prince Heir at his side, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun with a chance encounter between a war-weary diplomat and a curious child had evolved into something that might in time help heal the wounds of 20 years of conflict. The prince looked up at him, those alien eyes somehow conveying very human emotion. We did it, he said quietly. We made peace. We began it, Michael corrected gently. Maintaining it will be the work of generations, including mine. The prince nodded, his voice carrying the weight of future responsibility. And I will have your guidance in that work, always, Michael promised, placing his hand on the young Zenon's shoulder as the formal proceedings concluded and the delegations began to disperse. Ambassador Ellis approached, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and lingering amazement at the unprecedented events that had unfolded. Well, Commander, he said, when I assigned you to this mission, I expected technical expertise and diplomatic skill. I did not expect you to become the father of an alien prince and a living symbol of interspecies cooperation. Michael smiled slightly. Life takes unexpected turns, Ambassador. Indeed it does. Ellis glanced toward the Empress, who was engaged in conversation with neutral observers. She's invited you to accompany the royal family back to Xenos Prime as part of the implementation delegation Earth Command has approved, contingent on your acceptance. The invitation was both surprising and not. Michael's formal role as father guardian would naturally extend beyond the negotiations, yet the practical implications of a human living among Xenons, even temporarily, were complex. There's much I could accomplish there, he acknowledged. Cultural understanding, implementation, oversight, and continued mentorship of a certain young prince who has become rather attached to you. Ellis added with a knowing look, though I suspect that's the most compelling reason. Michael couldn't deny it. Over these remarkable weeks, his connection with Eris had evolved from diplomatic anomaly to genuine bond. The prospect of continuing that relationship, of helping guide the future leader of the Xenon people toward understanding of humanity, was both professionally significant and personally meaningful. I'll accept, he decided, as the delegations prepared to depart Astralis Prime. Michael found a quiet moment with Prince Aris in the station's arboretum, the neutral ground where their unlikely relationship had first begun to form. Mother says you're coming with us to Xenos Prime, the Prince said, barely containing his excitement. I am, Michael confirmed. There's much work to be done, implementing the treaty, and you'll continue teaching me about humans and Earth. That's part of my responsibility. As your father guardian, Michael nodded. Though I suspect I'll learn as much about Xenons as you learn about humans. The prince smiled, that human expression now natural on his alien features. We can teach each other like family, Michael agreed, the concept still remarkable in its unlikelihood, yet increasingly natural in its reality. As they looked out at the stars beyond the arboretum's transparent ceiling, the same stars that had witnessed 20 years of brutal conflict between their peoples, Michael reflected on the extraordinary turn of events that had brought them to this moment. What had begun with a child's innocent declaration had evolved into something with profound implications for both species. Father, the prince said quietly, using the term that had started this extraordinary journey. Yes, Iris, do you think Earth's stars will someday seem as familiar to me as Xenos? The question carried layers of meaning about future visits, about continued cooperation between their worlds, about a child's natural curiosity for places beyond his experience. I hope so, Michael replied. Honestly, I hope both our peoples will come to see all stars as shared heritage, rather than divided territory. The prince nodded thoughtfully. I would like that. He paused, then added with the directness characteristic of his species, and I am glad it was you who showed me it was possible. As they turned to join the preparations for departure, Michael placed his hand gently on the young Xenon's shoulder, a gesture of protection and guidance that transcended the differences between their worlds. In that simple touch lay the promise of what they had begun here, not merely peace between former enemies, but genuine understanding that recognized their shared future among the stars. And for Michael personally, something he had never expected to find again after the losses of war. A child to protect, to guide, and yes, to love, regardless of the blue skin and alien eyes that marked their different origins. What had begun as diplomatic duty had become something far more profound, a second chance at fatherhood, and with it healing for wounds he had thought would never close. Come, he said gently, your mother will be waiting. We have a long journey ahead together, the prince replied with simple certainty. Together, Michael agreed, and in that word lay all the promise of the future they had helped create.